"They ripped my dress, help me," whispered the fat waitress to the billionaire. And in that one moment, two broken lives collided. She was just trying to survive the night, working double shifts, hiding her pain behind polite smiles, until cruel laughter tore through the ballroom and her world came crashing down. But when a powerful stranger stepped forward, draping his jacket over her trembling shoulders, everything changed. What began as humiliation turned into something no one expected. Kindness from a man the world called heartless. Yet behind his calm eyes lay a secret heavier than her shame. And when the world twisted their story into scandal, both would lose everything they thought they could trust. Now, with faith hanging by a thread and reputations in ruins, one act of compassion could rewrite both their destinies. But in a world obsessed with image and power, can grace survive the spotlight? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The bitter November wind whipped around the elegant stone facade of Sterling Harbor Resort, sending dried leaves skittering across the circular driveway where luxury cars deposited fur-wrapped guests. Inside the warm kitchen, Alison Moore adjusted her name tag for the 10th time, trying to ignore how the standard-issue uniform pulled uncomfortably across her curves. "Lord have mercy, stop fidgeting like a cat in a room full of rockers," Sarah Bell said, her weathered hands expertly arranging appetizers on a silver tray. The older woman's grey hair was neatly tucked beneath her chef's cap, her eyes twinkling with maternal concern. "You look just fine, honey." Alison managed a weak smile. "Thanks, Sarah. I just wish they made these uniforms with real women in mind." She tugged at the hem of her black dress, willing it to stretch just a little more. "I feel like a sausage trying to squeeze into a cocktail dress." "Now stop that talk right this minute," Sarah scolded, but her voice was gentle. "The good Lord made you exactly as you're meant to be." She paused her work and placed both hands on the stainless steel prep table, fixing Alison with a knowing look. "Let me say a little prayer for us both. Lord, grant us patience with these fancy folks tonight, and help us remember that every soul that walks through those doors is your child, no matter how high and mighty they might act." Alison felt her shoulders relax slightly at Sarah's familiar ritual. This was their third charity gala together, and Sarah's steady presence always helped ground her. Still, exhaustion pulled at her bones from working the breakfast and lunch shifts earlier. The double shifts were necessary, though. Her mother's latest round of treatments hadn't been fully covered by insurance. "Time to face the music," Alison murmured, picking up her own loaded tray of delicate hors d'oeuvres. The kitchen doors swung, open to reveal the transformed ballroom, all crystal chandeliers and floating classical music from the string quartet in the corner. As she weaved between clusters of designer gowns and tuxedos, Alison kept her professional smile firmly in place. She'd learned long ago to make herself as invisible as possible while serving, but it didn't always work. Tonight was no exception. "Can you believe they let someone that size handle food?" The whispered comment floated from behind a perfectly manicured hand, followed by tittering laughter. Alison's cheeks burned, but she kept moving, kept smiling. "I mean, what kind of image does that project for a 5-star resort?" Another voice, another little dart of shame. "Focus on the job," she told herself firmly. "Focus on being kind." Her mother always said dignity wasn't about how others treated you, but how you chose to treat them in return. So Alison continued her rounds, offering polite smiles and quiet, "enjoy your evenings" to each guest, even those whose eyes slid past her as if she were furniture. The night stretched on endlessly. Her feet ached in their sensible black shoes, and her lower back protested from hours of careful balance with loaded trays. But she thought of her mother's gentle strength through years of illness, and drew from that well of patience. "More champagne for this section," Sarah murmured as they passed each other. "And honey, stand tall. You've got more class in your little finger than half these folks who were born with silver spoons in their mouths." Alison felt a rush of gratitude for her friend's support. She squared her shoulders and headed back to the kitchen for another round. The whispers might sting, but they couldn't touch her core belief that kindness was its own kind of strength, quiet, enduring, and more powerful than any cruel word could ever be. As she pushed through the kitchen doors, she caught a glimpse of her reflection in the polished steel of the refrigerator. Her cheeks were flushed from exertion, wisps of brown hair escaping from her careful bun. The uniform that looked so elegant on her slender co-workers strained against her curves, making her feel even more conspicuous. But she lifted her chin and straightened her spine. She might not fit their mold of perfection, but she had her own kind of grace, the kind that came from choosing compassion over bitterness, service over pride. "Table 6 needs more of the crab puffs," called out one of the kitchen staff, and Alison moved to help, grateful for the distraction from her thoughts. The night was young, and there were many more hours ahead. She would face them as she always did, one step at a time, one smile at a time, carrying her dignity like a quiet shield against the arrows of judgment that surrounded her. Through the kitchen window, she could see the moon rising over the Atlantic, its light dancing on the dark waters. Something about its steady presence reminded her that this too would pass like all nights before it, and tomorrow she would still be standing, still kind, still herself, which was perhaps the greatest victory of all. As the evening wore on, the champagne flowed more freely among the guests, and with it, inhibitions began to loosen. Near the center of the ballroom, a cluster of young socialites huddled together, their designer clothes and perfectly styled appearances marking them as members of the elite influencer crowd. They'd been documenting their night through carefully posed photos, but now boredom had set in. "This charity thing is such a snooze," complained Madison Wells, daughter of a tech mogul, as she swirled her champagne. "We need some entertainment." Her companions, Brittany and Chase, nodded in agreement. Their eyes scanned the room until they landed on Alison, who was carefully maneuvering through the crowd with a fully loaded tray. "Watch this." Chase smirked, positioning himself near Alison's path. As she passed, he subtly stuck out his foot, causing her to stumble slightly. The trio suppressed their giggles as Alison recovered her balance, maintaining her composure even as several canapes slid precariously close to the tray's edge. "Oh my God, did you see how she wobbled?" Madison whispered, her eyes glinting with cruel amusement. "Like a penguin in heels." Brittany raised her champagne flute with exaggerated grace. "Let's make this more interesting." As Alison approached their section again, Brittany pretended to gesture enthusiastically, accidentally sloshing champagne onto Alison's tray. The liquid splashed across the carefully arranged hors d'oeuvres, ruining them. "I am so sorry," Brittany said, her voice dripping with false concern. Alison merely nodded, her face flushed as she turned to head back to the kitchen for fresh appetizers. But the trio wasn't finished. They followed her movements like predators stalking prey, waiting for the perfect moment. As Alison passed by a particularly crowded area, Chase reached out and caught the loose thread at the seam of her uniform, a small imperfection they'd noticed earlier. "Oops," he said with mock innocence, giving the thread a sharp tug. The sound of ripping fabric seemed to echo through the ballroom as the seam split, revealing Alison's slip underneath. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Then Madison, seeing her chance, reached out and grabbed the torn fabric, yanking it hard. The rip traveled down Alison's back like a zipper being undone, the harsh sound of tearing material cutting through the elegant classical music. The ballroom fell silent. Alison stood frozen, her face draining of color as she felt the cool air on her exposed back. Then, like a wave breaking, laughter began to ripple through the crowd. It started with the influencer trio, their cruel mirth encouraging others to join in. Not everyone laughed. Some guests looked away in embarrassment or shame, while others watched with uncomfortable fascination. Tears welled up in Alison's eyes as the sound of mockery surrounded her. Her hands trembled as she clutched her serving tray to her chest, using it as a shield. The room seemed to spin around her as shame and humiliation crashed over her in waves. Sarah's voice cut through the chaos. "Alison, honey, come here!" But Alison couldn't face even her friend's kindness. She turned and fled, keeping the tray pressed against her front while trying to hold the torn dress together at her back. She ran blindly toward the service corridor, her vision blurred by tears. The laughter followed her, echoing in her ears even as she left the ballroom behind. She was so focused on escape that she didn't see the figure stepping out from one of the private meeting rooms until it was too late. The collision was solid, causing Alison to stumble backward. Strong hands steadied her before she could fall, but the movement caused her to lose her grip on the torn fabric of her dress. A fresh wave of humiliation washed over her as she realized who she'd run into. Graham Sterling stood before her, his tall frame imposing in his perfectly tailored tuxedo. For years, the resort staff had whispered about their reclusive owner, how he'd withdrawn from the world after losing his wife and daughter in a tragic accident. He was known for his detached demeanor, his board meetings conducted with clockwork precision and emotional distance. But now, as he took in the scene before him, this tearful woman with mascara-stained cheeks, clutching a serving tray to her chest while her uniform gaped open at the back. Something shifted in his steel-grey eyes. The careful mask of indifference cracked, revealing a flash of raw emotion underneath. Alison saw the moment of recognition in his face, the instant when he understood what had happened. She watched as his jaw tightened and his shoulders tensed, signs of humanity breaking through his carefully maintained facade. His eyes, usually so cold and distant, softened with an emotion she couldn't quite name. She stood there, trembling, tears still streaming down her face, unable to move or speak. The distant sounds of the gala filtered through the corridor. The music, the laughter, the clinking of glasses, a cruel reminder of the humiliation she'd just endured. For a moment, they were frozen in this tableau. The broken-hearted billionaire and the humiliated waitress, both stripped of their usual defenses by the rawness of the moment. Graham's hands, still holding her steady, felt warm through the thin fabric of her sleeves. For the first time in years, he found himself truly seeing another person's pain, truly feeling something beyond his own carefully maintained numbness. The vulnerability in Alison's eyes spoke to something deep within him, something he'd thought long buried with his family. The tears continued to fall down Alison's cheeks, and she couldn't stop the small sob that escaped her throat. She wanted to apologize, to step away, to hide, but she remained rooted to the spot, caught in this unexpected moment of connection with a man known for his emotional distance. In the wake of cruel laughter and casual cruelty, they stood in the quiet corridor, two wounded souls recognizing something of themselves in each other. The carefully constructed walls that had protected them both, his coldness, her quiet dignity, had been stripped away, leaving only their shared humanity. Neither of them could know it then, but this moment would change everything. For now they remained still, suspended in time as the sounds of the gala continued in the distance and the moon cast long shadows through the corridor windows, bearing witness to this unexpected intersection of their lives. "They ripped my dress." Alison's voice cracked, barely above a whisper. She struggled to meet Graham Sterling's eyes, her own gaze fixed somewhere near his perfectly polished shoes. "Please, help me." The words seemed to cost her everything she had left. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks, leaving tracks through her carefully applied makeup. Her shoulders trembled beneath his steadying hands, and Graham felt something shift inside his chest, a crack in the careful wall of indifference he'd built around himself. Without hesitation, he shrugged off his tuxedo jacket. The movement was swift but gentle as he draped the expensive fabric around her shoulders. The jacket engulfed her frame, providing a shield against curious glances from staff members hurrying past. The rich wool carried the subtle scent of his cologne, and Allison found herself drawing strength from its warmth. "This way," Graham said softly, his hand hovering near her elbow but not quite touching her. He guided her down a service hallway, away from the main corridors where guests might wander. His footsteps were measured, matching her unsteady pace. They passed storage rooms and maintenance closets, the fluorescent lights humming overhead. When they reached the staff quarters, Graham caught sight of Mark Peterson, one of the floor managers. "Peterson," he called out, his voice quiet but commanding. "Bring a robe to the break room, immediately." The manager's eyes widened at the sight of his normally distant employer, but he nodded quickly and hurried off. Graham led Allison into the empty break room, positioning himself between her and the door like a sentinel. In the harsh overhead lighting, Allison looked even more vulnerable. Her mascara had left dark smudges beneath her eyes, and her hands wouldn't stop shaking as they clutched the edges of his jacket together. Small, broken sobs escaped her throat despite her visible effort to contain them. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, mortification coloring her words. "I'm getting makeup on your jacket. It probably costs more than I make in a month." "The jacket doesn't matter," Graham replied, his voice gentler than it had been in years. He found himself wanting to ease her embarrassment, to somehow lift the weight of shame from her shoulders. Peterson returned with a plush white robe bearing the Sterling Harbor logo. Graham took it without comment and handed it to Allison, then turned his back to give her privacy to slip it on beneath his jacket. "I can call my driver," he offered, once she had secured the robe. "He'll take you home." But Allison shook her head, pride straightening her spine despite her tear-stained face. "Thank you, but I'll take the late bus. I always do." She attempted a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I don't want to be any more trouble." Graham wanted to insist, but something in her expression stopped him. There was dignity in her refusal, a quiet strength that demanded respect. He nodded once, understanding. "Keep the robe," he said, and he hesitated, then added, "I'm sorry this happened in my hotel." Allison's smile was tremulous but real this time. She slipped off his jacket and handed it back with careful movements. "Thank you, Mr. Sterling, for being kind." He watched her leave, her steps growing steadier as she walked away. The robe wrapped around her like armor, and despite everything, she held her head high. Graham remained in the doorway long after she'd gone, struck by the image of her, broken but unbowed, wearing dignity like a crown despite her tears. The bus ride home was long and quiet. Allison sat near the driver, the late-night vehicle nearly empty except for a few tired workers heading home from their shifts. The city lights blurred past the windows, and she held the robe tight around herself, still feeling the phantom warmth of Graham Sterling's jacket. Her small apartment was dark when she arrived, except for the night light she always left on for her mother. The living room had been converted into a bedroom, medical equipment humming quietly in the corner. Allison moved silently through the familiar space, her heart heavy but somehow lighter than it should have been. Her mother lay sleeping peacefully, her face relaxed in slumber. Allison leaned down and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead, careful not to wake her. The simple gesture carried all the love and worry she carried in her heart. For her mother's health, for their financial struggles, for all the weight she carried alone. Kneeling beside her bed, Allison closed her eyes and folded her hands. Her prayer was simple, spoken in the quiet darkness of her heart. She asked not for wealth or beauty, or even an easier life, just that someday, somewhere, kindness would outweigh shame. That the gentle words of people like Graham Sterling would speak louder than the cruel laughter of those who had hurt her. The night settled around her like a blanket, and despite the tears dried on her cheeks, despite the memory of humiliation still fresh in her mind, Allison found a moment of peace in her prayer. She held on to the memory of unexpected kindness, of dignity preserved through small acts of grace, and let it carry her through the darkness, toward tomorrow. The Sterling Harbor robe lay folded neatly on her worn armchair, a reminder that even on the hardest nights, compassion could appear in the most unexpected places. And sometimes that was enough to keep hope alive until morning. The morning sun filtered through thin curtains, casting gentle shadows across Allison's face. She stirred, her body aching from yesterday's long shift and emotional turmoil. Opening her eyes, she glanced at her bedside clock and jolted upright. 9:15. She was late. "Oh no," she muttered, scrambling out of bed. Her uniform from last night lay crumpled in the corner, a harsh reminder of everything that had happened. She pushed the memory aside and rushed to get ready. In the living room, her mother Ellen was already awake, propped up against her pillows with a book in her lap. The morning light caught the silver in her hair, making it shine like starlight. "Good morning, sweetheart," Ellen called out, her voice still weak from her recent surgery. "How was the gala last night? I tried to wait up for you." Allison paused in her rushing around, forcing a smile onto her face. "It went fine, Mom, just fine." The lie felt bitter on her tongue, but she couldn't bear to worry her mother. "You should have been sleeping, though. The doctor said rest is important." "I'm tired of resting." Ellen sighed, but her eyes were kind. "You work too hard, Allie. I wish—" "Don't," Allison said softly, leaning down to kiss her mother's cheek. "I love taking care of you. Now, I've got to run. I'm already late. Mrs. Jenkins from next door will be here soon to check on you." The bus ride to Sterling Harbor seemed endless. Allison's stomach churned with anxiety about facing her co-workers after last night's humiliation. Would they whisper behind her back? Would the story have spread already? When she finally rushed into the staff entrance, she was 30 minutes late. She hurried to the locker room, ready to face whatever consequences awaited her. But as she approached her locker, something unexpected caught her eye. A large white box sat in front of her locker, tied with a silver ribbon. For a moment she just stared at it, wondering if she was seeing things. Then, with trembling fingers, she untied the ribbon and lifted the lid. Inside lay a new uniform dress, perfectly sized and made of high-quality fabric that felt like silk beneath her fingers. But it was the handwritten note on top that made her breath catch in her throat. The elegant script read simply, "You deserved kindness long before tonight. G.S." Tears welled in her eyes as she traced the words with her fingertip. Graham Sterling, the billionaire owner who had shown her such unexpected gentleness, had thought of her again. The dress wasn't just a replacement. It was an acknowledgement of her dignity. She changed quickly, the new uniform fitting perfectly. The fabric felt like armor, giving her the confidence to hold her head high as she walked to the kitchen to begin her shift. Sarah Bell was already there, efficiently organizing the morning prep work. The moment she saw Allison, her keen eyes noticed something different. Well, Sarah said, a knowing smile playing on her lips. "Look who's got a certain glow about her this morning." She wiped her hands on her apron and came closer, examining the new uniform. "And unless I'm mistaken, that's not our standard issue dress." Allison felt her cheeks warm. "It was a gift," she admitted softly, "from Mr. Sterling." Sarah's eyebrows shot up. "Graham Sterling? Our very own reclusive billionaire?" She chuckled warmly. "Honey, I think you've got yourself a secret admirer." "It's not like that," Allison protested, but she couldn't hide her smile. "He was just being kind after what happened last night." Sarah's expression softened. Sometimes kindness is exactly what we need to heal. She squeezed Allison's hand. And sometimes it comes from the most unexpected places. The day passed in a blur of activity, but Allison felt different. The new uniform gave her confidence, and she found herself standing straighter, smiling more easily. Even the memories of last night's humiliation seemed to fade in the light of this morning's kindness. Late in the afternoon, the hotel's HR director, Mrs. Thompson, approached her during a quiet moment. The older woman's face was serious but kind. "Miss Moore, could you step into my office for a moment?" Allison's heart skipped a beat, wondering if this was about being late this morning. But when they sat down, Mrs. Thompson smiled. "I'm pleased to inform you that you're being promoted to hostess, effective immediately. Mr. Sterling specifically cited your unshakable grace under pressure as the reason for this promotion. The position comes with a significant pay increase and better hours." Allison sat there, stunned. I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Mrs. Thompson suggested gently. "You've earned this, Allison." The rest of her shift passed in a daze of joy and disbelief. As evening approached, she knew she had to thank Graham Sterling in person. She found him in his office, reviewing paperwork with his usual serious expression. He looked up as she knocked softly on the open door. "Miss Moore." "Mr. Sterling," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "I wanted to thank you for everything. The dress, the promotion. It's more than I deserve." Graham stood slowly, his expression softening almost imperceptibly. "No, Miss Moore, it's exactly what you deserve." He paused, then added softly, "You reminded me there's good left in the world." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Allison felt tears prick at her eyes again, but this time they were tears of gratitude. She nodded, unable to speak, and Graham's quiet understanding filled the silence. For a moment they stood there, two souls connected by an act of kindness that had somehow begun to heal them both. The morning sun had barely touched the horizon when Allison's phone began buzzing incessantly. At first she ignored it, thinking it was her usual morning alarm. But the notifications kept coming, one after another, until curiosity got the better of her. Wrapped in her worn cotton robe, she reached for her phone and felt her heart stop. There, splashed across her social media feed, was a video of herself from 2 nights ago. But something was wrong. Very wrong. The footage had been heavily edited, cutting together moments that never happened. It showed her laughing, tossing her hair, and seemingly flirting with guests before the dress incident. Then it cut to Graham Sterling giving her his jacket, but the angle and editing made it look intimate, planned. Comments were already flooding in, each one a dagger to her heart. Gold digger. Shameless. Poor Mr. Sterling. Her hands shaking, Allison scrolled through local news sites. The Barrows Cove Daily had already picked up the story. The headline made her stomach lurch. Waitress seduces reclusive billionaire. The article was worse than the headline. It painted her as a calculating seductress who had orchestrated the entire incident to get Graham's attention. They'd even dug up old photos from her social media, choosing unflattering angles to support their narrative. "This can't be happening," she whispered to herself, tears blurring her vision. Her mother called from the other room. "Alison? Is everything all right?" "Fine, Mum," she managed to call back, her voice surprisingly steady despite the tremors running through her body. Just reading the news." She got dressed mechanically, pulling on her new uniform with hands that felt numb. The dress that had given her such joy yesterday now felt like a mark of shame. Still, she held her head high as she walked to the resort, praying that somehow this would all blow over. But as soon as she entered Sterling Harbor Resort, she knew something was terribly wrong. Conversation stopped when she walked by. Staff members who had been friendly yesterday now avoided her eyes. At the front desk, Mrs. Thompson was waiting with a grim expression. "Miss Moore, could you come with me, please?" In the HR office, 3 members of the resort's PR board sat waiting. Their expressions were carefully neutral, but their eyes were cold. The youngest, a woman in a sharp blazer, spoke first. "Miss Moore, in light of recent developments, we feel it's best for all parties if you take a leave of absence until this matter settles." "But I didn't do anything wrong," Alison protested, her voice cracking. "That video is edited. It's all lies." The older gentleman at the center of the table cleared his throat. "The truth, Miss Moore, is less relevant than public perception. Sterling Harbor Resort has a reputation to maintain. We're placing you on indefinite suspension, effective immediately." Has Alison swallowed hard. "Has Mr. Sterling approved this?" The PR team exchanged glances. "Mr. Sterling has been advised not to have any direct contact with you during this period. It's for the best." The words hit her like physical blows. Graham hadn't even fought for her. He'd chosen silence over truth, reputation over justice. The man who had shown her such kindness had abandoned her to protect his image. With trembling fingers, she unpinned her name tag and placed it on the table. "I understand," she said quietly, though her heart was screaming. As she walked through the resort's grand lobby one last time, a fine drizzle began to fall outside, as if the sky itself was weeping for her. Through the window of his top-floor office, Graham Sterling watched her small figure move across the parking lot, unable to look away, but equally unable to act. He stood there long after she'd disappeared from view, one hand pressed against the cold glass. The PR team had been clear. Any intervention from him would only fuel the scandal. But watching her walk away, knowing the truth and staying silent, felt like betraying not just Alison but something deeper in himself that had begun to wake up. The day dragged on endlessly for Alison. She sat in her small apartment, watching the rain and trying not to check her phone. The story had gone viral, with more news outlets picking it up every hour. Each new headline seemed crueler than the last. As evening settled in, a knock at her door startled her. She opened it to find Sarah Bell standing there, holding a covered pot and wearing a determined expression. "I brought soup," Sarah announced, bustling past Alison into the tiny kitchen. "Homemade chicken noodle. Good for what ails you, as my mama used to say." "Sarah, Alison's voice broke. "I don't understand why this is happening." Sarah set the pot down and turned to face her, her wise eyes full of compassion. "Come here, child." Alison fell into the older woman's embrace, finally letting out the sobs she'd been holding back all day. Sarah held her, rocking gently like a mother comforting a child. "You listen to me now," Sarah said firmly when Alison's tears had subsided. "When God allows the storm, it's 'cause He's planning the rainbow." Alison pulled back, wiping her eyes. "I don't see how any good can come from this. My reputation is ruined. I've lost my job. And Graham—" She couldn't finish the sentence. The truth has a way of coming to light, Sarah said, ladling out 2 bowls of soup. And sometimes the darkest storms bring the brightest blessings. Now eat your soup before it gets cold. They sat together at Allison's small kitchen table, the warm aroma of chicken soup filling the apartment. Outside, the rain continued to fall, but inside, a tiny spark of comfort had been kindled by Sarah's presence and her unwavering faith. Allison stirred her soup, not really eating. "I really thought he was different," she whispered. "I thought—" "Don't you go giving up on faith just yet," Sarah interrupted gently. "The story isn't over, child. Not by a long shot." But as much as Allison wanted to believe her friend's words, all she could feel was the weight of betrayal and the sting of public humiliation. The kind eyes that had once looked at her with such understanding were now hidden behind a wall of corporate silence, and the warmth of yesterday's hope had been washed away by today's cold reality. Sarah stayed until late, making sure Allison ate at least some of the soup and helping her turn off her phone to escape the constant notifications. Before leaving, she hugged Allison tightly and whispered, "Remember, dear heart, storms don't last forever." Alone again, Allison stood by her window, watching the streetlights blur through the rain. Somewhere across town, in his penthouse office, Graham Sterling was doing the same, both of them separated by circumstance, but united in their silent pain, waiting for a dawn that seemed impossibly far away. The morning after her suspension, Allison's alarm rang at 5 o'clock. Out of habit, she reached for her resort uniform before remembering she wouldn't need it anymore. Her throat tightened, but she forced herself to get dressed. She had bills to pay, and a mother who needed her. By 7 o'clock, she was standing outside Pete's Diner, a small breakfast spot downtown. The owner recognized her from the news, but hired her anyway for the morning rush. "Everyone deserves a chance to work," he said gruffly, handing her an apron. The work was familiar: clearing tables, refilling coffee cups, wiping down sticky surfaces. But it felt different now. Customers whispered when she passed, some pointing at their phones where her story still circulated. She kept her head down and focused on each task, one moment at a time. At home between shifts, she found her mother having another bad day. Margaret Moore sat in her worn armchair, oxygen tube in place, struggling to catch her breath. "The doctor called," her mother wheezed. "They want to adjust my medication. It's going to cost more." Allison's heart sank as she looked at the stack of bills on the kitchen counter. The insurance barely covered the basics, and now this. She forced a smile. "Don't worry, Mum. I'll figure something out." That evening, she picked up another shift at the Lighthouse Cafe, a tourist spot by the harbour. The manager was kind enough, but the pay was less than half what she'd made at Sterling Harbour. As she scrubbed dried ketchup off a table, her phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Come to church tomorrow. The soup kitchen needs volunteers. Good for the soul." Allison hesitated. The thought of facing more people made her stomach clench. But Sarah had been right before, and maybe helping others would help her forget her own troubles for a while. Across town, in his penthouse office, Graham Sterling sat at his desk, long after his staff had gone home. Allison's personnel file lay open before him, her staff photo paper clipped to the top corner. In it, she smiled, warmly at the camera, her eyes bright with kindness he'd rarely seen in his world of corporate politics. He picked up his phone and dialed his event manager, James. "About those local catering contracts we discussed?" "Yes, sir. I've arranged everything as you asked. She'll get the first call tomorrow morning." Graham nodded, though no one could see him. "Make sure she doesn't know it's coming from us. And James, make sure the pay is generous." The next morning, Allison received a call from an unfamiliar number. A woman introduced herself as the coordinator for the Barrows Cove Business Association. We need catering for our monthly luncheons. Your name was recommended. The contract wasn't huge, but it would help. Similar calls followed throughout the week: a law firm's office parties, a real estate agency's open houses, a local gallery's art openings. Each time, the clients mentioned hearing good things about her work, though none could quite remember who had recommended her. Between these jobs, Alison found herself at the church soup kitchen with Sarah. The familiar smell of vegetable stew filled the air as they chopped carrots side by side. "The knife work's good therapy," Sarah commented, watching Alison attack an onion. "Better than sitting at home thinking too much. I just keep wondering why it all happened." Alison admitted, "Why would God let me be humiliated like that?" Sarah's knife paused. "Maybe it's not about the humiliation. Maybe it's about what comes after." A line of people began forming outside, the homeless, the hungry, the forgotten. As Alison served them, she saw something in their eyes she recognized: dignity in the face of hardship. Each thank you they offered felt like a small gift, a reminder that kindness still existed in the world. One elderly man with weathered hands took his bowl and said, "God bless you, miss. You have kind eyes." Tears pricked at Alison's eyes as she smiled back. Here she was, worrying about her reputation, while these people worried about their next meal. The perspective shift felt like a gentle correction from above. Late that night, Graham stood at his office window, the lights of Barrow's Cove twinkling below. He held Alison's staff photo, remembering how she'd looked that night in his jacket. Vulnerable, but unbroken. The warmth she'd stirred in him refused to fade, despite his attempts to focus on business. His phone buzzed with another crisis, reporters asking for comments, board members demanding action. He set it aside and kept staring at her photo, wondering when exactly this waitress had managed to thaw the ice around his heart. Back in her apartment, Alison counted the day's tips and new catering deposits. The money would cover her mother's new medication, at least for now. She said her nightly prayers, grateful for small mercies, Sarah's friendship, strangers' kindness, and work that kept her hands busy even when her heart was heavy. As she drifted off to sleep, she thought about the soup kitchen guests, their gratitude for simple things. Maybe Sarah was right. Maybe this storm would pass, and somewhere behind the clouds a rainbow was waiting to appear. In the quiet darkness, two souls lay awake in different parts of town. One learning to trust again, the other remembering how to feel. Between them stretched a connection neither fully understood, waiting for truth to light the way forward. 3 days crawled by like molasses in winter. The church's community center hummed with quiet activity on a Wednesday afternoon. Steam rose from large pots of soup while volunteers bustled around the kitchen, their footsteps echoing off the worn linoleum floors. Alison stood behind a long serving table, ladling hot vegetable soup into bowls. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore a faded blue apron over her clothes. The work was honest and simple, and for a few hours each day, it helped her forget about the scandal that had turned her life upside down. The main doors opened, letting in a burst of cold air. Alison didn't look up, too focused on making sure each bowl had enough carrots and potatoes. But then she heard familiar voices, the community center director speaking in that special tone people used when important visitors arrived. "Mr. Sterling, we're so grateful you're considering helping with the renovations. As you can see, our kitchen facilities could use updating." Alison's hand froze mid-ladle. She looked up just as Graham Sterling walked into the serving area, dressed in an expertly tailored grey suit that seemed out of place among the humble surroundings. Their eyes met across the steam rising from the soup pot. The ladle slipped in her grip, nearly upending the entire pot. Hot soup sloshed dangerously close to the edge, but she caught it just in time, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. "Careful there," Sarah called from nearby, though Alison barely heard her. Graham stood rooted to the spot, his usual composed expression cracking slightly. He looked different than she remembered, tired around the eyes, as if he hadn't been sleeping well. The community centre director kept talking about plumbing updates and electrical systems, but Graham's attention remained fixed on Alison. "We serve about 150 people each day," the director was saying. "But our equipment is outdated. I'll have my team draw up renovation plans." Graham interrupted smoothly, his voice carrying across the room. "And I'd like to arrange for immediate supply donations, whatever you need. Food, cooking equipment, serving materials." The director beamed, but Alison felt her throat tighten. Was this guilt money? A way to ease his conscience about her suspension? She focused on serving the next person in line, trying to ignore the weight of his gaze. But Graham wasn't leaving. He thanked the director and made his way toward the serving station, stopping directly, across from where Alison stood. Up close, she could see the slight tremor in his usually steady hands. "Hello, Alison," he said softly. She managed a small nod, still gripping the ladle like a shield. "Mr. Sterling, the soup smells good." "It's just vegetables and broth," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Nothing fancy." An uncomfortable silence stretched between them, broken only by the clink of spoons and quiet conversation from the dining area. Sarah, bless her heart, suddenly found urgent business in the back kitchen, leaving them alone at the serving station. Finally, Alison found her voice. "You didn't have to hide from me." The words came out more hurt than angry. Graham's shoulders tensed, then dropped. "I wasn't hiding," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "I was ashamed I didn't speak up." The simple honesty in his admission caught her off guard. She looked up at him properly for the first time, seeing past the wealthy businessman to the grieving man beneath. "The coffee here isn't terrible," she found herself saying. "If you have time." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I always have time for terrible coffee." They found a quiet corner in the dining area after the lunch rush had ended. 2 steaming styrofoam cups sat between them on a scratched plastic table. Graham had loosened his tie, and Alison had removed her apron. They looked like an unlikely pair. The billionaire and the waitress, sharing bad coffee in a soup kitchen. "I lost my wife and daughter 6 years ago," Graham said suddenly, staring into his cup. "Car accident. I was supposed to be driving them that day, but I had an important meeting." Alison's heart squeezed. "I'm so sorry." "I buried myself in work after that, easier than feeling anything." He looked up at her. "Until that night at the gala, when I saw you standing there, trying so hard to hold on to your dignity despite what they'd done, it woke something up in me." "Is that why you helped with the catering jobs?" she asked quietly. He had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "You knew? I suspected? Nobody gets that many random recommendations in 1 week." A small smile tugged at her lips. "Thank you, by the way. It's helped with Mom's medical bills." "How is she doing?" "Better some days than others, but she's a fighter." Graham nodded, taking a sip of coffee. He made a face that startled a laugh out of Alison, the first genuine laugh she'd shared in weeks. The sound seemed to surprise them both. "You weren't kidding about the coffee," he said, but he was smiling too, a real smile that reached his eyes. They talked for nearly an hour, about grief and hope and second chances, about how life rarely goes as planned, but sometimes the detours lead to unexpected grace. Graham told her about his daughter's love for dancing, and Alison shared stories about growing up with a single mom who worked 3 jobs but never forgot to pray. "I've forgotten how to do that," Graham admitted. "Pray, I mean." It's like riding a bike. Allison said gently, "You never really forget. You just have to be brave enough to try again." The afternoon light was fading when they finally stood up. Graham gathered their empty cups, his movements deliberate, as if he was reluctant to end the conversation. "Thank you," he said, "for the terrible coffee and the good company." Allison smiled, feeling lighter than she had in days. "Thank you for not hiding anymore." As she watched him leave, Sarah appeared at her elbow. "Well?" her friend asked, eyes twinkling. "Well, what?" "Sometimes God answers prayers in mysterious ways," Sarah said cryptically, heading back to the kitchen with a knowing smile. Allison touched her cheeks, surprised to find them warm. For the first time since the scandal broke, she felt something that felt suspiciously like hope stirring in her heart. The week after their coffee shop encounter flowed by like a gentle stream. Allison found herself humming while chopping vegetables at the soup kitchen, her mind drifting to that afternoon's conversation more often than she cared to admit. The simple honesty they'd shared had planted something in her heart, not just hope, but a spark of inspiration. One particularly busy Thursday, as she and Sarah cleaned up after the lunch rush, Allison couldn't contain her idea any longer. "What if we made this bigger?" she blurted out, wiping down a table with extra vigor. Sarah paused mid-sweep, her wise eyes twinkling. "Made what bigger, honey?" "This." Allison gestured at the community center's humble dining space. "What if we created a real cafe? Not just a soup kitchen, but a place where everyone could eat, rich or poor, lonely or surrounded by family. Where people could pay what they can afford, or volunteer their time instead." She grabbed a stack of paper napkins and started sketching her vision, her words tumbling out faster. "We could have proper tables, fresh flowers, maybe even live music sometimes. No one would know who paid full price and who's working for their meal. It would be about dignity, about bringing people together." Sarah leaned her broom against the wall and pulled up a chair, studying Allison's enthusiastic napkin drawings. "You've really thought this through, haven't you?" "I have." Allison's cheeks flushed. "I know it sounds crazy." "No," Sarah interrupted, touching her arm. "It sounds exactly like what this town needs, and I know someone who might think so, too." Allison's heart skipped. "Graham? That man's got more than money, child. He's got a heart that's finally waking up." Sarah's smile turned mischievous. "And I haven't seen you this excited about anything in years." For 3 days, Allison gathered her courage. She collected her napkin sketches, researched similar concepts in other cities, and even drafted a rough business plan based on her years of restaurant experience. Still, her hands trembled as she stood outside Graham's office at Sterling Harbor Resort. His secretary recognized her and waved her straight in. Graham looked up from his desk, surprise and pleasure flickering across his face. "Allison," he said warmly, standing. "This is unexpected." She clutched her folder of napkins. "I have an idea. It might be terrible, but I'd really like you to hear it." The terrible coffee didn't scare me away. He smiled, gesturing to a chair. "I doubt your idea will." Taking a deep breath, Allison spread out her sketches. She explained her vision for the community cafe, her voice growing stronger as she described how it could transform lives. "It's not just about feeding people," she said. "It's about creating a place where everyone belongs, where kindness isn't charity, it's just how things work." Graham listened intently, asking thoughtful questions about logistics and costs. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "It's ambitious," he said finally. Allison's heart sank. "I know it's probably too much to ask." "I'll sponsor it," he interrupted. "But anonymously." She blinked. "What?" "The concept is solid, and God knows this town needs more places that bring people together. He leaned forward, his expression serious. But given recent events, my name attached to it would only hurt you. Let this be your project, Allison. I'll provide the funding and advice, but you'll be the face of it. Tears pricked at her eyes. Why would you do this? His smile was gentle. Because sometimes the best way to heal is to help others heal too. Over the next few weeks, they fell into a rhythm. Morning meetings over coffee, much better than the community centers, to review potential locations. Afternoon visits to local farmers and suppliers, with Allison teaching Graham the art of negotiating with small-town vendors, so different from his corporate dealings. She discovered he had a dry sense of humor that emerged when he felt comfortable. He learned that she could name every type of New England apple by taste alone, a skill passed down from her grandmother. Their conversations flowed easily now, ranging from menu planning to childhood memories. One evening, as they sat surrounded by paint swatches in what would become the cafe, Allison realized she'd been laughing at Graham's terrible attempt at a Maine accent. The sound felt natural now, not forced or hollow like it had been since the scandal. "You're getting better at that," Graham said softly. "At what? Laughing? Being yourself again?" She ducked her head, oddly touched that he'd noticed. "You're getting better at it too." He nodded, understanding her meaning. "I actually slept through the night yesterday. First time in years without the nightmares," she finished quietly. They'd talked about those during one of their supplier visits, how he'd wake up reliving the day he lost his family. "Thank you," he said suddenly. "For what?" "For trusting me with your dream, for showing me there's still good work to be done in the world." He picked up another paint swatch. "Now please tell me we're not actually considering sunburst yellow for the walls." Allison laughed again, the sound echoing off the empty walls of what would soon become something beautiful. Outside, the early evening light painted the sky in soft pinks and purples, promising another day of possibility tomorrow. Sarah, who'd been watching their growing friendship with quiet satisfaction, often reminded Allison that God works in mysterious ways. "Sometimes," she'd say with that knowing look, "healing comes disguised as a business plan." Looking at Graham as he seriously debated the merits of various shades of blue, Allison thought she was beginning to understand exactly what Sarah meant. The morning dawned bright and crisp, a perfect October day for new beginnings. The renovated fishing shed, once weathered and forgotten on the downtown waterfront, now stood proudly transformed. Fresh navy blue paint gleamed in the early light, and hand-painted letters spelled out Community Cafe in warm golden hues across the front. Inside, Allison's hands shook as she arranged flowers on the mismatched tables they'd collected from yard sales and antique shops. Each centerpiece held wildflowers in mason jars, simple but charming, just like their vision for the place. The worn wooden floors had been lovingly restored, keeping their character while gaining new life. Cheerful curtains in soft cream cotton framed windows that offered views of the harbor. Sarah bustled around the kitchen, her domain now much larger than her previous workspace at the resort. She hummed as she checked the soup stocks and tested the industrial-grade ovens Graham had insisted on installing. "Lord above, this kitchen's a dream," she called out to Allison. "Almost makes me forget my arthritic knees." Allison smiled, adjusting a chair for the 100th time. "You're sure you're okay managing it all?" "Child, I've been feeding people since before you were born. Now stop fussing and get yourself ready. First customers will be here soon." As if on cue, they heard boots on the front steps. Allison's heart jumped as she saw old Joe, one of the harbor's long-time fishermen, peer through the window. She hurried to unlock the door. "Morning, Miss Allison," he said, removing his cap. "Thought I'd come see what all the fuss was about." "You're our first customer." Allison beamed, leading him to a table by the window. Coffee's fresh, and Sarah's made her famous fish chowder. More people began trickling in. Mrs. Peterson, a widow who lived alone above the bookshop, Maria Santos and her 3 young children, dock workers on their morning break. The cafe slowly filled with the sounds of conversation and clinking spoons. Allison moved between tables, explaining their pay-what-you-can system. Some guests left extra to cover others' meals, while a few quietly offered to help wash dishes instead of paying. Every interaction reinforced what she'd hoped, that kindness could be as natural as breathing. Through the morning rush, she caught glimpses of a familiar figure outside. Graham would appear briefly at different windows, checking in without drawing attention. He wore casual clothes instead of his usual suits, but Allison would know him anywhere. Each time she spotted him, warmth bloomed in her chest. By noon, the cafe was bustling. Old Joe chatted with the dock workers about the morning's catch. Mrs. Peterson had taken Maria's youngest on her lap, reading him a story while his mother enjoyed a rare, peaceful meal. Sarah's laughter rang out from the kitchen as she taught a teenage volunteer how to properly crimp pie crusts. At 2 o'clock, Allison picked up the microphone they'd set up for announcements. Her voice trembled slightly as she addressed the room. "I want to thank everyone for making our first day so special," she began. "This cafe exists because of countless acts of kindness, from our volunteers, our suppliers, and our donors who believed in this dream." As she spoke, movement caught her eye. Graham stood in the doorway, trying to blend in with other customers. Their eyes met, and she couldn't help smiling. Someone very wise once told me that sometimes the best way to heal is to help others heal too. Today I've seen that truth in action. Every person who's walked through these doors has contributed to something beautiful, a place where everyone belongs. The room erupted in applause. Sarah wiped tears from her eyes with her apron, and even old Joe looked suspiciously misty. When Allison looked back at the doorway, Graham had disappeared. The rest of the day passed in a blur of activity. As evening approached, the cafe took on a magical quality. String lights twinkled along the ceiling beams, casting a warm glow over the weathered walls. The harbor lights reflected on the water outside, creating dancing patterns through the windows. While clearing tables, Allison noticed Graham slip quietly through the front door. He moved to the wooden donation box near the register, carefully sliding in an envelope before disappearing again into the night. Later, after the last customer had left and Sarah had headed home, Allison opened the donation box. Among the cash and small checks, she found a single cream-colored envelope. Her hands shook as she opened it, though she already knew what she'd find. Inside was a check for $500,000, signed simply, "A friend." Allison sank into a nearby chair, holding the check carefully, as if it might disappear. The amount was staggering, but it wasn't the money that brought tears to her eyes. It was the way Graham had given it, quietly, without fanfare or recognition. He'd understood that this place wasn't about grand gestures or public acclaim. It was about simple kindness, passed from one person to another until it created something greater than any individual could achieve alone. Through the window, she could see the harbor lights reflecting off the water, countless points of brightness in the darkness. Like the cafe itself, each light was small on its own, but together they created something beautiful. She carefully tucked the check into her pocket, making a mental note to thank her friend properly tomorrow. The cafe's sign still glowed softly in the night, promising welcome to anyone who might need it. Inside, the tables stood ready for tomorrow's guests, and Sarah's kitchen waited to feed more hungry souls. Allison took one last look around before turning out the lights, her heart full of gratitude for second chances and the quiet ways love could transform a broken world. The morning sun had barely touched the cafe windows when Alison's phone started buzzing. Text messages flooded in, each one more urgent than the last. With trembling fingers, she opened the local news website and felt her heart drop. There, splashed across the screen in bold letters, was the headline, "Billionaire buys fat waitress's love." Below it, a grainy photo showed her and Graham laughing together over coffee at the cafe, his hand gesturing animatedly while she smiled, completely at ease. The article was brutal. It painted their friendship as a calculated transaction, suggesting Graham was paying for her affections through the cafe. They'd twisted every innocent moment into something tawdry and cheap. Alison's phone rang. It was Sarah. "Honey, don't read the comments," Sarah said immediately. "It's all garbage." But Alison already had. Words like gold digger and desperate burned in her mind. Her chest felt tight, like she couldn't quite catch her breath. "The sponsors," she managed to say. "Have you heard anything?" Sarah's silence said everything. Within hours, emails started arriving. Corporate sponsors, local businesses, even individual donors were withdrawing their support. Each message contained careful phrases like public image concerns and protecting our brand integrity. The cafe's future, so bright just yesterday, was crumbling. Alison tried calling Graham, but his phone went straight to voicemail. She left 3 messages, each one more desperate than the last. "Please, we need to address this together. People will believe what we tell them. We can fix this." But Graham had disappeared completely. His office said he was unavailable indefinitely. The resort's PR team issued a terse statement, distancing themselves from the cafe project. Around noon, Alison's personal phone rang. It was the hospital. "Ms. Moore, your mother has been admitted to the emergency room. She had a collapse at home." The world tilted sideways. Alison grabbed her keys, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold them. Sarah found her in the hospital waiting room 3 hours later. Alison sat perfectly still, staring at the mint-green walls without seeing them. "The doctors say it was the stress," Alison said quietly. She saw the articles. Someone showed her the comments online. Her blood pressure spiked and... Her voice cracked. Sarah settled into the chair beside her, taking Alison's cold hands in her warm ones. "Your mama's strong, just like you. She'll pull through." "I'm not strong," Alison whispered. "I'm just... tired. So tired of being judged, of trying to prove I deserve basic decency." Through the window of the intensive care unit, she could see her mother lying still among the machines. The steady beep of monitors marked time like a metronome, measuring out moments of uncertainty. "And Graham?" Sarah asked gently. Alison's laugh was hollow. "Gone, just like before. When things get hard, he..." She shook her head. "I thought we were friends. I thought he understood what it meant to be lonely, to need someone to believe in you." Sarah squeezed her hands. "Forgiveness isn't weakness," she said softly. "It's how you heal." But Alison just turned away, watching her mother's chest rise and fall with mechanical precision. She was too exhausted to think about healing, too drained to consider forgiveness. The weight of public scrutiny, her mother's illness, and Graham's abandonment pressed down on her like physical things. The night stretched endlessly. Sarah brought coffee and sandwiches that Alison couldn't eat. Nurses came and went, checking vitals, adjusting medications. Outside the window, the town's lights twinkled indifferently. Alison held her mother's frail hand, noting how the skin had become tissue paper thin. This hand had once brushed away her tears after schoolyard taunts, had taught her to bake cookies and say her prayers. Now it lay motionless, connected to tubes and monitors. "I'm sorry, Mama," she whispered. "I never meant for any of this to touch you." Sarah dozed in the corner chair, her Bible open on her lap. The page was marked to Psalms, but Alison couldn't find comfort in Scripture tonight. Her faith felt as fragile as her mother's breathing. Her phone buzzed again, another news alert. Without thinking, she opened it. More pictures, more speculation, more cruel comments about her weight and Graham's wealth. She turned the phone off and slipped it into her purse. The cafe would probably close. The sponsors weren't coming back. All those dreams of creating a place where everyone belonged, where kindness outweighed judgment, they seemed naive now, almost foolish. And Graham. The thought of him hurt worst of all. She'd believed in his quiet strength, his hidden compassion. She'd thought she'd seen behind his walls to something real and true. But when the storms came, he'd retreated behind those walls again, leaving her to face the tempest alone. A nurse entered, checking readings and making notes. "Try to rest," she advised kindly. "Your mother's stable. We'll wake you if anything changes." But Alison couldn't rest. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw those headlines, those cruel comments. She heard the whispers that had followed her all her life. Too big, too kind, too trusting, too much. Sarah stirred in her chair, murmuring a prayer in her sleep. The sound was familiar, comforting, a reminder of simpler days when faith came easier, and trust didn't feel like a weapon that could be turned against you. Through the long night, Alison kept her vigil. She watched the monitor's steady rhythm, held her mother's unresponsive hand, and tried not to think about tomorrow. She was too tired to believe in healing anymore, too wounded to trust in second chances. Outside, the night deepened toward dawn, but inside the sterile hospital room, time seemed suspended in a haze of beeping monitors and fluorescent lights, marking hours that brought no peace and no answers. 3 days melted together in the sterile confines of room 214. Alison settled into a routine that felt both endless and fragile. Every morning, she'd straighten her mother's blankets, adjust the thin hospital pillow, and pull the vinyl chair closer to the bed. The familiar scent of antiseptic hung in the air, mingling with the dampness that seeped in through the window seals when it rained. She read from her mother's worn Bible, its pages soft and dog-eared from years of faithful hands. Her voice filled the quiet room with ancient words of comfort. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." The steady beep of monitors provided a rhythmic backdrop to her readings. Between passages, she would hum the lullabies her mother had once sung to her, gentle melodies about moonbeams and guardian angels. Sometimes her mother's fingers would twitch in response, a small sign that somewhere beneath the medication and exhaustion, she was listening. Sarah visited each afternoon, bringing homemade soup and fresh cornbread that Alison barely touched. "You need to keep up your strength," she'd say, but Alison could only manage small bites between readings and prayer. The nurses moved quietly, checking vitals and adjusting IV bags. They'd grown used to finding Alison there at all hours, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, yesterday's clothes wrinkled from sleeping in the chair. They brought her extra blankets and cups of lukewarm coffee, their kindness a balm against the harsh headlines that still flickered across her silent phone. On the third evening, as grey clouds gathered outside the window, her mother stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, clearer than they'd been since the collapse. "Alison!" she whispered, her voice rough from disuse. Alison leaned forward, clutching her mother's hand. "I'm here, Mama. I'm right here." Her mother's grip tightened weakly. "You've been reading to me." "Yes, Mama. Your favorite Psalms." A small smile touched her mother's pale lips. "Always so good to me." She paused, gathering strength. "But honey, you're meant for more than this. More than pain." Alison felt tears prick at her eyes. "Mama, don't worry about me. Just rest." "No." Her mother's voice grew stronger. "Listen, to me. That man, the one from the resort. He's not the monster he thinks he is." She took a shaky breath. "And neither are you the failure you believe yourself to be." The words hit Allison like a physical force. She sat back, letting them sink in as rain began to patter against the window. "But Mama, after everything that happened, life's too short for walls, honey. God knows I learned that the hard way." Her mother's eyes drifted closed again. "Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is try one more time." The room fell quiet, except for the soft rhythm of rain and monitors. Allison sat there as evening deepened into night, her mother's words echoing in her mind. When the night nurse came to check vitals, she suggested Allison take a short walk. "Your mother's stable now. Some fresh air might do you good." Reluctantly, Allison gathered her coat and stepped out into the hospital corridor. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as she made her way to the ground floor and pushed through the heavy glass doors. Outside, soft snow had begun to fall, replacing the earlier rain. The flakes danced beneath the streetlights, transforming the ordinary scene into something almost magical. Allison pulled her coat tighter and walked to the corner. Across the street, the community cafe stood dark and silent. Snow gathered on the windowsills and awning. The grand opening banner still hung limply, its edges curled from recent storms. Through the front windows, she could make out the empty tables and chairs, places where hope had briefly flourished before withering under judgment's harsh glare. She knew what needed to be done. The thought had been growing clearer with each psalm she'd read, each quiet hour by her mother's bedside. Someone needed to take the first step toward healing. Someone needed to be brave enough to reach across the divide. But standing there in the gentle snow, watching more flakes gather on the cafe's dark windows, Allison couldn't quite find the courage. The memory of those cruel headlines still stung. The weight of public scrutiny still pressed down on her shoulders. She hugged herself against the cold, remembering Graham's face the last time she'd seen him, drawn and haunted, retreat already visible in his eyes. He'd looked so lost, so convinced of his own guilt, just like she'd been convinced of her own unworthiness for so long. The snow continued to fall, softening the harsh edges of the world. Across the street, the cafe waited in darkness. And somewhere in this town, behind his own walls of grief and fear, Graham waited too, though he might not know it yet. Allison stood there a moment longer, letting the snow dust her hair and shoulders. Her mother's words came back to her. "You're meant for more than pain." But the courage to prove those words true, that would have to wait for another day. With a final look at the darkened cafe, she turned and walked back towards the hospital entrance, leaving small footprints in the gathering snow. Each step felt heavy with things unsaid, bridges not yet crossed, and the persistent ache of hearts still learning to hope again. Graham Sterling's black Tesla glided silently through the empty streets of Barrows Cove. The dashboard clock glowed 12:45 in the morning. Snowflakes danced in his headlights as he drove past darkened storefronts and quiet homes. His hands gripped the steering wheel too tightly, knuckles white against the leather. Sleep had become impossible these past few days. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Allison's face, first filled with joy during the cafe's opening, then crumpling with hurt when the headlines struck again. The Tesla's tires crunched over fresh snow as he pulled into the small lot behind the community cafe. He sat there for a long moment, engine off, watching his breath fog the windshield. The building's dark silhouette loomed before him, a testament to dreams interrupted. Finally, Graham reached for the keys in his coat pocket. His fingers brushed against the cafe's spare key, the one he'd never returned after helping with renovations. He hadn't planned to come here tonight. But something drew him, the same invisible thread that had been pulling him toward Allison since that first night at the gala. The lock clicked open with a hollow sound. Graham stepped inside, fumbling for the light switch. The fluorescent bulbs flickered reluctantly to life, revealing a scene that made his chest ache. Half-packed cardboard boxes dotted the floor like abandoned islands. Chairs sat askew, some stacked haphazardly against walls. The cheerful curtains Allison had hung still framed the windows, but they seemed to droop now, their patterns dulled by the harsh lighting. Graham moved slowly through the space, his footsteps echoing. The coffee machine sat unplugged, its chrome surface gathering dust. A stack of unused menus lay scattered across the counter, their corners curling slightly. "What have I done?" he whispered to the empty room. He remembered the day they'd chosen these tables together, Allison running her hand along the smooth wood, talking about making people feel welcome. He'd watched her eyes light up as she described her vision, a place where dignity wasn't measured by the size of someone's wallet. Near the register, a cork bulletin board still hung on the wall. Graham approached it, drawn by a familiar piece of paper pinned in the center. Allison's handwriting flowed across it in neat blue ink. "For every soul who's ever been laughed at, overlooked, or told they're not enough, you are loved." Graham reached out, fingers trembling as they traced the words. He remembered watching her pin this note up during opening week, her face glowing with purpose. She'd caught him looking and smiled shyly. "Sometimes people need to see it in writing," she'd said, "to believe it's true." The words blurred as tears filled his eyes. Here in the empty cafe, with no one to witness. Graham Sterling finally let his carefully constructed walls crumble. Hot tears rolled down his cheeks as years of buried grief rose to the surface. He thought of his late wife and daughter, how he'd locked their memory away along with his heart. He thought of Allison's quiet strength, how she'd walked through humiliation with grace he couldn't fathom, how she'd shown him that vulnerability wasn't weakness, but the truest kind of courage. Graham's legs gave way. He sank to his knees on the cold tile floor, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. For the first time since losing his family, he felt the full weight of his loneliness, his fear, his desperate need for connection. "God," he whispered, voice rough with emotion. "I don't know if you're listening. I haven't exactly been good at talking to you lately." He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "But thank you. Thank you for sending Allison into my life. Thank you for showing me there's still good in this world, still hope." The prayer came naturally, words spilling out like water from a broken dam. He thanked God for Allison's kindness, her resilience, the way she saw beauty in broken things. He asked for forgiveness for his cowardice, for letting fear keep him silent when she needed him most. "Please," he prayed, "help me find the courage to make this right." Graham remained on his knees until his tears subsided. The cafe's silence felt different now, less empty, more expectant, like a space waiting to be filled again with laughter and hope. As the first light of dawn began to creep through the windows, Graham stood slowly. His knees protested the movement, but his heart felt lighter than it had in years. He looked once more at Allison's note, then at the cafe around him. In that moment, watching sunrise paint the walls in soft gold, Graham made a decision. He couldn't change the past, couldn't undo the pain his silence had caused. But he could choose differently now, could choose courage over fear, truth over safety, love over isolation. Tomorrow would bring change. Tomorrow he would finally stand up and speak truth to power, consequences be damned. But for now, in these quiet moments before dawn, Graham offered one more prayer of gratitude for the woman who had taught him how to feel again. The television station's makeup artist dabbed powder across Graham Sterling's forehead. But his hands wouldn't stop trembling. He sat in the small green room of WCVB Channel 5, watching the morning show hosts chat through the monitor. In 15 minutes, he would go live to tell his story. "Mr. Sterling?" A young production assistant poked her head in. "We're ready for your mic check." Graham nodded, straightening his tie. He'd chosen a simple navy suit today. No designer labels, no gold cufflinks. This wasn't about the billionaire CEO. This was about a broken man finding his voice. In the hallway, snippets of the morning broadcast filtered through. Coming up next, exclusive interview with Graham Sterling, breaking his silence on the Sterling Harbor scandal. The sound technician clipped a microphone to his lapel. "Testing. 1, 2. Graham cleared his throat, speaking softly. "Allison, I hope you're watching." Across town at Barrows Cove General Hospital, Sarah Bell adjusted the small television mounted on the wall of room 312. Allison sat beside her mother's bed, picking at a loose thread on her sweater. "You don't have to watch this," Sarah said gently. "Yes, I do." Allison's voice was quiet but firm. Her mother dozed peacefully, medication keeping her comfortable after yesterday's tests. The morning show host's cheerful banter filled the room. And now, in a WCVB exclusive, we're joined by Graham Sterling, CEO of Sterling Harbor Resorts. The camera panned to show Graham sitting in an armchair, hands clasped in his lap. Even through the screen, his nervousness was visible. "Mr. Sterling, thank you for being here," the female host began. "You've been quite private since the tragic loss of your wife and daughter 8 years ago. What made you decide to speak out now?" Graham took a deep breath. "Sometimes silence becomes a prison of our own making. I've hidden behind mine for far too long." In the hospital room, Allison leaned forward slightly. "I lost my wife, Carolyn, and our daughter Emma in a car accident in 2015. Graham continued, his voice steady despite the pain in his eyes. "They were driving home from Emma's ballet recital. A drunk driver ran a red light. I was supposed to be there that night, but I was stuck in a board meeting." He paused, swallowing hard. "I've carried that guilt for 8 years, buried myself in work, convinced myself that if I just stayed busy enough, stayed distant enough, I couldn't be hurt again." The male host nodded sympathetically. "That must have been incredibly difficult." "It was, but something happened recently that made me realize I've been wrong, that in protecting myself from pain, I've also shut out the possibility of healing." Sarah reached over and squeezed Allison's hand. "You're referring to the recent incidents at Sterling Harbor Resort?" The female host prompted. "Yes." Graham sat straighter. "But not in the way the tabloids would have you believe. I want to set the record straight about Allison Moore." In the hospital room, Allison's breath caught. "Allison Moore is one of the most courageous people I've ever met," Graham said firmly. "She endured horrible public humiliation with a grace I can barely comprehend. When her uniform was deliberately torn by cruel pranksters at our charity gala, she didn't lash out. She didn't seek revenge. She simply asked for help with dignity." He looked directly into the camera. "The stories suggesting she somehow orchestrated this for attention or financial gain are completely false. The edited social media videos are manipulated lies. Allison Moore is a hard-working woman who supports her ill mother, volunteers at homeless shelters, and treats everyone, even those who've hurt her, with kindness." Tears spilled down Allison's cheeks. Sarah pressed a tissue into her hand. "In fact," Graham continued, "it was Allison who inspired the Community Cafe project, a pay-what-you-can restaurant designed to serve everyone with dignity, regardless of their ability to pay. She saw a need in our community and found a way to meet it with compassion." The female host leaned forward. "The cafe recently closed due to controversy and pulled sponsorships. Do you regret your involvement?" My only regret is not speaking up sooner to defend her reputation." Graham's voice grew stronger. "I let fear of scandal, of board pressure, of public opinion keep me silent. In doing so, I failed not only Alison, but my own conscience." He took another deep breath. "That's why I'm here today. To tell the truth, whatever the consequences. Alison Moore taught me that real strength isn't found in isolation or self-protection. It's found in vulnerability, in reaching out to others, in choosing kindness even when the world is cruel." In the hospital room, Sarah wrapped an arm around Alison's shoulders as she cried quietly. "What would you say to those who withdrew support from the cafe project?" The male host asked. "I would ask them to look past the gossip and see the truth. This project isn't about me or Alison. It's about creating a space where everyone in our community can eat with dignity, where kindness matters more than status, where healing can happen over a simple cup of coffee." The female host smiled warmly. "And what would you say to Alison if she's watching?" Graham's composed facade cracked slightly. "I would say, thank you. Thank you for showing me that a heart can thaw after years of winter. Thank you for believing in the goodness of people even when they let you down. And I'm sorry, so deeply sorry, for not standing beside you when you needed support." Alison pressed her hand to her mouth, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "To anyone watching," Graham continued, "if you believe in second chances, in the power of community, in the idea that every person deserves to be treated with dignity, please help us reopen the community cafe. Every donation, large or small, is an investment in hope." The station displayed a website for donations. Within minutes, phones across Barrows Cove began buzzing with notification alerts as the interview spread across social media. Local business owners called in pledges. Church groups organized fundraisers. "Your mother was right," Sarah whispered to Alison. "He's not the monster he thought he was." Alison wiped her eyes, watching as Graham finished the interview. His face looked lighter somehow, as if speaking truth had lifted a physical weight from his shoulders. "Sometimes," she said softly, "people just need a chance to remember who they really are." Her phone buzzed. A message from the cafe's donation platform. "Funds exceeded target goal. Multiple sponsorship offers received." Sarah looked at the numbers and laughed in delight. "Well, would you look at that? Seems like your mama was right about something else too." "What's that?" "When God allows the storm, it's 'cause he's planning the rainbow." Through the hospital window, morning sunlight streamed in, painting the room in warm gold. Alison's mother stirred slightly, opening her eyes to smile at her daughter. On the television, Graham Sterling stood up, straightened his jacket, and walked out of frame with his head held high, a man who had finally found his voice. The world, which had seemed so dark just days ago, began to shine with possibility again. Twilight settled over Barrows Cove like a soft blanket, turning the falling snow into gentle whispers of white against the darkening sky. Outside St. Mary's Hospital, Alison stood beneath the covered entrance, watching her breath form delicate clouds in the cold air. Her feet felt rooted to the concrete as she waited, her heart drumming an unsteady rhythm against her ribs. The snow dampened all sound, creating a hushed stillness broken only by the occasional swoosh of passing cars. Hospital lights cast long shadows across the pristine white ground, and somewhere in the distance, church bells chimed 6 o'clock. A familiar black SUV pulled into the parking lot, its headlights cutting through the growing darkness. Alison's breath caught in her throat as Graham Sterling stepped out, his tall figure silhouetted against the swirling snow. He walked toward her slowly, deliberately, as if giving her time to turn away if she chose. But she didn't move. She couldn't. They stood facing each other, separated by just a few feet of snowy ground and years of unspoken words. Snowflakes caught in Graham's dark hair, and his usual polished appearance showed signs of wear. His tie slightly askew, a day's worth of stubble shadowing his jaw. His eyes, though, held a new light, different from the guarded look she'd grown used to seeing. Neither spoke at first. The silence stretched between them, filled with the soft patter of snow and distant hospital sounds. A nurse walked past, her shoes squeaking against the wet floor inside, but Allison barely noticed. Finally, Graham took a step closer. His voice, when it came, was rough with emotion. "You saved me." 3 simple words, yet they carried the weight of transformation. Allison felt tears prick at her eyes, but these were different from the ones she'd shed watching his interview. These were healing tears. "And you gave me back my courage," she replied softly, her voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm her. Graham's eyes softened. "How's your mother?" "Better. The doctors say she can go home tomorrow." Allison wrapped her arms around herself, more from habit than cold. "She saw your interview. She wanted me to tell you she's proud of you." A ghost of a smile touched Graham's lips. "I had a good teacher in learning how to be brave." Snowflakes continued to fall, dusting their shoulders with white. In the distance, they could see lights glowing from downtown, and among them, the dark windows of the cafe. "Would you like to see something?" Graham asked, gesturing toward his car. Allison nodded, and they walked together through the snow-covered parking lot. The drive downtown was quiet, but it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It felt more like the pause between movements in a symphony, a moment of breath before the music begins again. As they approached the cafe, Allison noticed something different. Lights blazed from within, and shadows moved behind the windows. Graham parked, and as they stepped out, the sounds of singing drifted through the walls. When Graham opened the door, Allison gasped. The cafe was filled with people, dozens of volunteers from the community, all busy at work. Some were up on ladders, painting walls in warm, welcoming colors. Others assembled new furniture or hung curtains. In the kitchen, Sarah Bell directed traffic like a seasoned conductor, her laugh ringing out above the general commotion. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. The hymn floated through the air as people worked, some humming, others singing full-voiced. The atmosphere was electric with joy and purpose. Sarah spotted them and hurried over, flour dusting her apron. "Well, look who finally showed up. We've been busy bees while you two were having your moment in the snow." Her eyes twinkled with knowing affection. "Sarah, what is all this?" Allison asked, still taking in the transformation around her. "This." Sarah gestured broadly. "This is community, honey. After that interview aired, my phone nearly exploded. Everyone wanted to help. The hardware store donated paint, the furniture shop sent chairs and tables, and would you believe the garden center is bringing planters tomorrow?" Graham cleared his throat. "I hope you don't mind, but I had an idea while I was driving over." He pulled out a simple wooden sign from behind the counter. "I thought maybe we could rename it." Allison's eyes filled with tears as she read the hand-painted letters. Grace Harbor Cafe. "Because Grace brought us here," Graham explained softly. "And because everyone deserves a safe harbor." Sarah wiped her hands on her apron, trying to hide her own emotional response. "Well, don't just stand there staring at it. There's work to be done. Graham, those boxes of dishes won't unpack themselves. Allison, honey, come help me organize this kitchen properly." They worked side by side as evening deepened into night. Allison and Graham found themselves repeatedly catching each other's eye across the room, sharing small smiles of understanding. Every now and then, their hands would brush as they passed tools or moved furniture, each touch a quiet acknowledgement of the journey that had brought them here. The volunteers worked tirelessly, fueled by Sarah's endless supply of coffee and her famous cinnamon rolls. Someone had brought an old radio, and hymns mixed with popular songs as people sang along. The walls, once bare, now glowed with warm colours, soft sage green and gentle cream with accents of deep blue like the harbour waters. "Looking good, isn't it?" Sarah said, appearing beside Alison as she arranged mugs on a shelf. "You know what this reminds me of?" "What's that?" "That old story about the barn raising, where the whole community comes together to help one family rebuild. Except this time, we're all family here." She squeezed Alison's shoulder. "And speaking of family, your mama called while you were outside, said to tell you she's feeling stronger already." Alison smiled, remembering her mother's words from earlier. She always said everything happens for a reason. "Smart woman, your mama." Sarah glanced meaningfully toward Graham, who was helping mount a large mirror on the far wall. Sometimes the best gifts come wrapped in the hardest packages. As the evening wore on, volunteers began trickling out, each leaving with hugs and promises to return tomorrow. Soon only Alison, Graham, and Sarah remained, standing in the middle of what felt like a miracle in progress. Sarah gathered her things, pulling on her coat. "Well, I'd better head home before my old bones forget how to move. Don't stay up too late, you two. We've got a big day tomorrow. Soft openings at 10 o'clock sharp." After she left, Alison and Graham stood side by side, surveying the transformed space. Through the front windows, they could see snow still falling, creating a peaceful backdrop to their sanctuary of warmth and light. "I never thought I'd see this place alive again," Alison admitted quietly. Graham turned to face her, his expression earnest. "When I lost my wife and daughter, I thought I'd never feel alive again either. But you showed me that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means learning to live with an open heart again." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching snowflakes dance outside the windows of their rebuilt dream. The name Grace Harbour Cafe caught the light above them, casting gentle shadows on the freshly painted walls. Inside, the scent of fresh paint mingled with coffee and cinnamon, promising new beginnings. In that moment, surrounded by the evidence of community love and second chances, they both knew that something beautiful had been born from the ashes of their shared pain. The cafe wasn't just a restaurant anymore, it had become a testament to the power of forgiveness, courage, and grace. The week leading up to Christmas Eve transformed Grace Harbour Cafe into a beacon of holiday spirit. Evergreen garlands wrapped the exposed wooden beams, their fresh scent mingling with coffee and cinnamon. Paper snowflakes, carefully cut by local schoolchildren, danced from fishing lines strung across the ceiling. The whole space glowed with the warm light of dozens of vintage lanterns Sarah had collected from townspeople's attics. Tonight, Christmas Eve, the cafe hummed with life and laughter. Families filled every table, sharing plates of Sarah's famous sugar cookies and steaming mugs of hot chocolate. The local church choir, positioned near the stone fireplace, sang carols that floated through the room like a gentle embrace. In the kitchen, Alison stood before the small mirror in the staff room, her hands trembling slightly as she smoothed down her dress. It was the same black dress from that fateful night at the gala, but different now. Where cruel hands had torn the fabric, delicate gold thread now traced a pattern like streaming light. Sarah had spent hours helping her mend it, saying, "Sometimes our broken places become the most beautiful parts of us." "You look lovely, dear." Sarah's voice came from the doorway. She wore a festive red sweater, her silver hair catching the light. "Though I suspect a certain someone will think so no matter what you wear." Alison felt her cheeks warm. "Sarah, don't start. Can't an old woman enjoy a little romance?" Sarah's eyes twinkled as she adjusted Alison's collar. "Your mother's settled in her favorite spot by the fire, and she hasn't stopped smiling all evening." Through the kitchen window, Allison could see her mother in her wheelchair, wrapped in a warm blanket, chatting animatedly with other guests. The hospital had released her 3 days ago, and her recovery was steadily progressing. The community had rallied around them, organizing rides to physical therapy and bringing home-cooked meals. The choir began the opening notes of Silent Night, the harmonies rising pure and clear. Allison took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and stepped out of the kitchen. The cafe looked magical. Strings of white lights crisscrossed overhead, creating a canopy of stars. The polished wood floors reflected their glow, and the large windows looking out over the harbor showed fat snowflakes drifting past. The fireplace crackled merrily, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Graham stood near the entrance, talking quietly with an elderly couple. He wore a deep blue sweater that brought out his eyes, and his usual stern expression had softened into something gentle. When he caught sight of Allison, he excused himself and made his way toward her. "You're wearing the dress," he said softly, his eyes taking in the gold-threaded repairs. Allison nodded. "Sarah helped me fix it. She said sometimes we need to wear our scars proudly, to remind us how far we've come." Sarah's wisdom strikes again. Graham's smile was tender as he held out his hand. "Would you dance with me?" The choir's voices swelled with the second verse of Silent Night, and Allison placed her hand in his. They moved to a clear space near the fireplace, where other couples had begun swaying to the music. Graham's hand was warm against her back, steady and sure. "You know," he said as they danced, "I used to hate Christmas. After I lost Claire and Emma, every holiday felt like reopening a wound. But tonight—" He looked around at the cafe, at the faces lit with joy and connection. "Tonight feels like healing." Allison followed his gaze, taking in the scene they'd created together. A homeless man she recognized from the soup kitchen sat sharing coffee with the town's wealthiest banker. Children darted between tables, their laughter mixing with the music. Sarah stood at the counter, serving slices of pie and dispensing hugs with equal generosity. "You turned my ruins into grace," Graham whispered, drawing her closer. Allison's heart swelled with emotion. "And you helped me believe I was worth saving," she replied, her voice soft but steady. "When everyone else saw someone to laugh at, you saw someone worth protecting." They danced in comfortable silence as the choir moved into the final verse. Through the windows, the snow continued to fall, each flake catching the light like a tiny star. The harbor beyond lay peaceful under its growing blanket of white, boats gently rocking at their moorings. Sarah watched them from her spot at the counter, wiping away a happy tear with the corner of her apron. She'd known somehow, from that first terrible night at the gala, that God had a plan bigger than any of them could see. Now, watching Allison and Graham sway to the music, their faces soft with contentment, she sent up a silent prayer of gratitude. Around them, the cafe glowed with warmth and fellowship. The scent of pine and cinnamon hung in the air, mixing with coffee and wood smoke. Children dozed in their parents' laps, full of cookies and hot chocolate. The choir's voices rose in perfect harmony, filling every corner with peace. For the first time since losing his family, Graham felt truly present, anchored by the woman in his arms and the community they'd built together. And Allison, who had spent so long believing she needed to make herself smaller to be worthy of love, stood tall and confident, finally feeling whole. They continued to dance as Silent Night drew to a close, their shadows merging on the wooden floor. Outside, the snow fell steadily, transforming Barrows Cove into a wonderland of white. Inside Grace Harbor Cafe, love and healing wrapped around them like a warm embrace, as natural as breathing, as precious as grace. "Thank you for being here," If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe. And tomorrow, I'll bring you another story crafted with heart.